But yeah, excited to be unpacking stock donations today. I've got a slide here with a couple of things that we're going to be covering, so we can just jump right to it and get the show on the road. So yeah, firstly, I want to give everybody an overview of what we're going to be covering here. We're going to start with why stock donations for nonprofits, and talk about why this matters, and it can be such a beneficial giving channel for nonprofits to build out and keep cultivating. We're also going to be talking about why stock donations for donors. That's equally as important, right? Looking at what are the benefits to donors, and also how they usually give stock and what are those common pitfalls that arise. So if you're considering either donating stock as a donor or receiving stock as a nonprofit, we want to be mindful about what those sides of the experience are going to look like, and really dig deep into some of the things that kind of get in the way and could really affect that experience. And then we're also going to be going into how you can receive stock donations as a nonprofit actively and successfully, based on what we've seen at Overflow. Of course, I'll give an overview of what we do as well, but that'll be a short snippet of what we're going to be covering about. This is mostly for you, bringing you value around this concept and really experience around stock donations and how we can make that more successful across the board, because it can really make the pie of generosity so much bigger, realizing how much wealth people have accumulated and really continue to build in the stock market. And then lastly, we're going to be talking about, different questions. So if you have any questions along the way, submit them through the chat, and we can definitely, come back to them and have that dedicated portion for FAQ. So, yeah, with that, I want to make sure I say hi to everybody here. We've got, I know, Olenike, thanks so much for joining. I actually lived in Ireland for a bit, a short period of time, but I had a great time. So would love to connect with you after and hear what part of Ireland you're from. But generally from everyone, I'd love to know if you're with a nonprofit, if you're a donor, if you're a volunteer, if you're a consultant to nonprofits, all of the above for the overachievers. So whatever you fall into, I'd love to know who you are, where you're from. Doria, all of the above, amazing. Yes, it's a multiple choice little quiz. Jen, same thing. That's awesome. Anybody else, feel free to put them in the chat. We'd just love to know who I'm speaking with here. And yes, Dublin is phenomenal. I had a great time in Dublin, visited Galway as well. Olenike, that's awesome. Social enterprise, love that. Elaine, nonprofit employee, donor, though not yet with stocks. Yeah, good to know, Karen. And of course, as we talk about the mechanics of giving stock, if you have anything that remains unclear for you to even look at giving stock and go through that process, feel free to let us know. Want to make sure you walk away from this webinar ready to do that. Grace, looks like individual giving at an arts organization. Phenomenal. All right. So, yep, keep that coming. Thanks so much for letting me know who you're with and what you do. Would love to share a bit about myself, so you know who you're going to be hearing from for the next, 40 minutes or so. But of course, I wanted to make this as engaging as possible. But my name is Jose Anaya, and I'm the head of business development at Overflow. We're a company that focuses on amplifying generosity through non-cash assets. So looking at giving and how that can be maximized and done excellently in areas like stocks. And eventually we're going to be tapping into cryptocurrency. So this webinar is going to be focused around stocks specifically, but that's really what we do in a nutshell. And then prior to this, I had a role in a fintech company helping employees build more retirement savings. And believe it or not, we did that through cashback rewards that people would earn day in and day out. So we found a way to channel cashback rewards, put that into retirement accounts. But that really gave me a lot of exposure to the investment space and working with a lot of financial advisors and wealth managers as we were going to market. And I've actually known the CEO and the founder of Overflow for like 3 years now. He's been a personal friend of mine. And I was able to really witness how this company came about. And so when he reached out to me, I just felt like it was the right convergence of events that happened in my life, or, having been in the retirement space. And yes, Johnny, Vance is awesome. Vance Roush is our founder and CEO. And so he called me up out of the blue. He said, "Hey, how would you feel about building future generosity with us?" And I'm like, "Look, I know how much money people are literally holding in those retirement accounts, and how much they have in stocks, and how much money's coming in. There is so much wealth that is in stocks that is yet to be given to amazing causes and amazing organizations around the world." So that was my fire. I really got into this wanting to see more generosity happen, and realizing that stocks can be an amazing bucket to unlock, and it has so many benefits that people have yet to discover. And then lastly, fun fact about myself, I talked about living in Ireland for a little bit. That happened in 2017. My phenomenal wife came to me with an idea of doing the whole digital nomad lifestyle. And so we ended up finding these remote job opportunities pre-COVID back in 2017. And we ended up living across 17 countries. So love travel. And now that COVID is getting further and further behind us, hopefully, can't wait to go and travel again. So if you're a travel fanatic and enthusiast like me, feel free to drop in your favorite country and we can talk about it at some point. But yeah, that's a bit about myself. So hope everybody's ready. We're going to jump right into why stock donations matter. And yeah, I mean, firstly, it's so hard to really kind of wrap your head around it immediately, because it's important to look at the data, right? And we all know theoretically that there's so much money held in stock, but if we drill deeper and we look at even census data from back in 2017, we find that the way that American households are holding their assets today looks very different than what we may think, right? So typically, fundraising might happen in the form of debit or credit or cash, but in fact, people only have about 3% of their total assets in checking and savings accounts. And so statistically, 86% of giving is actually currently happening in the form of debit or credit, but we're only really tapping into 3% of people's assets. 97% is actually held in non-cash assets. And it can be tied up in real estate, a lot of different non-liquid assets, but stocks make up a really big portion of that, and it's liquid, right? It's assets that they can easily move around. You can't just pick up your home and give it to an organization, but with stocks, you can definitely move those funds around and be able to make an impact with those funds. And so that's really why we're so excited about this space, realizing that that's truly where people's wealth is at, not so much in debit or credit or checking and savings accounts. And actually, some research came out from Texas Tech University showing that it was a research across over 1 million nonprofit organizations looking at their tax returns for the course of 5 years. And in that period of time, they noticed that nonprofits that were actively receiving stock were growing 6 times faster than those that weren't. And so not only is it evident now that people have most of their wealth in stocks, but it's also now evident that if you talk about donating stock, or if you engage in donating stock, you're making a significant impact. As a donor, you're helping a nonprofit grow incredibly and exponentially faster than they otherwise would. And as a nonprofit, you're doing the right thing when it comes to scaling and increasing the amount of fundraising that happens to really power the impact you're making. And so hope that was helpful. Really, to sum it up, we talked about obviously a lot of wealth being held in non-cash assets, but in practicality, now we're seeing that the average cash donation nationwide is $128. Whereas the average stock donation that we're seeing through Overflow has been $6,031. So we're seeing about a 47x multiplier on what a nonprofit would typically see when it comes to cash donations. And there's a lot of underlying layers to this. One of the ones that I wanted to highlight is the fact that people are just naturally more generous when they're invited to give out of areas where they have more wealth. right? So if you were to be asking somebody to donate via debit or credit, let's say $1,000, comparatively, that can feel like a really large sum because they could use those $1,000 for a lot of things to compete for that. It could be bills, it could be groceries, it could be, day-to-day things. So there's a lot of competing for those funds in that checking and savings account. But what we found is that if you actively engage donors around the opportunity to give stock, they find that to be a totally different opportunity, right? I mean, $6,000 compared to whatever hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands they might have in that brokerage account. It's definitely a different way to think about it, and people tend to give more out of those areas where they have more wealth. And so, it may seem obvious, but it's really cool to see that as people think about donating stock, they're actually giving incredibly larger amounts to organizations. All right. So with that, I'd love to go ahead and explain how somebody gives stock, or really, we're going to get into that in just a minute, but really mostly why donating stock is actually more beneficial to donors than just giving via debit or credit. And so if we look at the way that people are kind of giving today, they might have a lot of stock accumulated, but they may end up selling that stock. And so I want to walk through an example here that we have. Let's say this gentleman here, well, the photo we have, he's named Alex. So let's say Alex ended up buying $5,000 worth of Apple stock, and then that ended up growing to $10,000. Typically, they would have to, that donor, Alex, would have to pay capital gains tax, right? So that's really what people end up doing when they purchase a stock, let it grow with the market, see that it's appreciated. They might just cash out, and immediately they're going to be subject to a capital gains tax on that appreciation, right? So on the $5,000 they ended up making on that stock, they might end up having to pay up to 37% in capital gains tax. If you're in California, that's definitely the case. And so what you can see here is that already that donation value, if they sell it, instead of just donating the stock directly to an organization, it's going to be, $8,150. That's still going to be a significant amount, but you can see that a portion of that kind of vanished and just went to the IRS. Now, with Overflow, and what we're encouraging people to do is to take the stock and donate it directly to an organization. And what you'll find is that in the same case with Alex, buying shares at $5,000 and that growing to $10,000, when they donate the stock to an organization, here's the really cool thing about this. You don't pay any capital gains tax, and the nonprofit doesn't have to pay any capital gains tax. So the capital gains tax burden is really going to go away, and the nonprofit firstly gets that full amount, right? So instead of $8,150, they get that additional portion, full portion of $10,000. And now the donor can actually write off the donation at the market value. So they get a $10,000 write-off instead of, $8,150. Or in this case, if we compare it to debit or credit giving, let's say that I just gave $5,000, that write-off is only going to be $5,000. But if I put in $5,000 into a certain stock like Apple and that grew to $10,000, then now my write-off is going to be basically 2x, right? I essentially let the stock market grow my investment and grow my donations. So that's a really great element of donating stock and why people give stock in the first place. To sum it up, you don't have to pay any capital gains tax as a donor or a nonprofit. You're giving more to the nonprofit in the end. You're giving out of an area of your wealth that you actually have more capacity in as a donor, right? Because giving thousands of dollars is going to be harder within a checking account because you hold less money in a checking account. So you're likely going to give more out of that bigger bucket that you have available, where you're not doing much more with it as a donor than letting it sit, letting it ride the market, appreciate, depreciate, whatever happens typically. And so there's such an opportunity there. And so I think that giving capacity is something that also very much resonates with donors as they think about giving, right? They love your organization, they want to support, they want to give, but they're thinking about where they can give from. And so this is where nonprofits can step in and really provide that avenue and make it an easy experience for donors. Now, with that said, typically the process of donating stock is not easy, and that's what we're going to unpack here. And there are some really common pitfalls that we can delve into, but to walk through it sequentially here, we'll find that the first step in donating stock, it's typically donor raising their hand or contacting somebody at the nonprofit saying that they want to donate publicly traded stock. We find that it can be a passive channel where it's typically the donor that brings it up, and then the nonprofit goes ahead and walks the donor through that experience. But right then and there, we already see an opportunity to instead of being reactive and waiting for the donor to bring it up, how about we become more proactive and get the word out and engage donors around this to then really take advantage of this opportunity. And so once a donor goes to the nonprofit and says, hey, I want to donate stock, the nonprofit is likely going to give the donor brokerage account information if that's available, right? So we've talked to nonprofits that have a donor say, hey, I want to give stock, but they don't really have a brokerage account, and so they need help kind of quickly setting that up and seeing how they can have the right pieces in place to receive that stock donation. And we're going to get into that. But bottom line, you want to give donors some instruction, right? You want to let them know how to do that. And nonprofits, oftentimes would give like a brokerage account number and a DTC number that the donor can actually then take to their broker to then complete those instructions. So you'll find here that the third step is a donor finding that charitable stock transfer form from their brokerage and completing it. So now the donor actually goes to their own broker. Let's say they have stock within Fidelity or Schwab. They would go to, contact Fidelity and say, hey, I want to give stock. Here's the form. What do I have to go ahead and do, with you guys to actually get the stock to my nonprofit? So naturally, it requires some manual coordination, the donor getting on the phone with the broker, and then ultimately filling out a form that they would have to mail or fax to their brokerage so that the brokerage can initiate the transfer, right? So they're first going to go to you as a nonprofit, say, I want to give stock, get some information from you so they know where to send the stock to, but then go to their broker and then talk to the broker about how to go about doing this, get whatever form they need from the broker, and then make sure that that's going to be mailed into them and filled out completely. And then, then really the nonprofit receiving the gift of stock in their brokerage account. And what we often hear from various organizations is that they may get a stock gift without really knowing who ended up making that donation. And the reason why is because brokers are not focus on development. They're not focused on donor development necessarily, or giving you as a nonprofit all the information you need, right? They often cases, they have a confidentiality clause with their donors. Well, the donor in this case being their client, right? So they cannot just pass around the client's information with anyone. And so you could be getting that stock gift into your brokerage account, but then have to piece together and do a bit of a guessing game around who ended up making that stock gift. And so we found that organizations really try to uncover who exactly made that gift. And it can be difficult if the broker doesn't tell you, right? And then lastly, this is where you need to provide as a nonprofit the tax deductible receipt to the donors so they can go ahead and incorporate that into their taxes and be able to get the appropriate write-off at that point in time. So there is a form to be provided to the donor, and typically it's something that nonprofits may have to manually piece together and then provide to the donor. And so at Overflow, we've been focusing on really streamlining every single one of these steps so that it's as frictionless as possible. As you can already tell, this is a decent amount of steps, and it can take a donor weeks up to a month to complete that process, since there's stuff that they have to do on their end and, people they have to follow up with, same with nonprofit. And so it isn't set up to be done at scale. That's the unfortunate thing about the way stock donations are typically done. But hey, it presents an opportunity for innovation, and it presents an opportunity for making things easier and encouraging more generosity in this way. I do see Jen, Johnny, and Karen make a couple of comments. I just want to get up to speed here. Thank you, Jen and Johnny. Yeah, Johnny, great question. Nonprofits generally sell the stock for cash. instead of keeping it, it can be really complex to kind of figure out, okay, am I going to hold on to the stock? How long am I going to hold on to it for? When am I going to sell it? And people don't want to have any liability for selling it at the wrong time, right? We already know what's been happening with GameStop and AMC, so you don't want to get stuck in that. And then Karen, yeah, the guest who gave that gift is certainly a pain point that we've been coming across, and yeah, really frustrating. Frustrating for the nonprofit, also frustrating for the donor, because they probably just give you a really decent amount of money, and they want to be treated, they want that donation to be treated effectively, right? They want to know that you received it, and they want to feel that trust along the way. So, yeah, with that, just wanted to go ahead and recap some of the pitfalls that typically happen, and we're going to talk about ways to avoid that here going forward. So if you have any further questions, keep putting them in the chat. Appreciate the ones that have been coming in here. But yeah, common pitfalls: donor not knowing that you accept stock to begin with, right? So if they have to go to your website and click, 10 different times to get to other ways to give, etc., and then see that in small text or small fonts that you receive stock, that's not the ideal scenario that you want to have a donor go through, right? You want to make it obvious. You want to make it evident to the donor that you accept stock, and then realizing that they're usually not going to know the steps they need to take to go ahead and fulfill that stock donation. So it's really on you as a nonprofit to effectively communicate what they're going to have to do to go ahead and process that stock donation. And next, there could be manual errors. So you want to make sure that the donor feels guided and they feel comfortable with what they have to do on their end. Don't just hand it off to them and say, hey, it's completely on you. Do whatever you want to do. And then we'll keep an eye out for it. Like, that's not enough. Typically, when it comes to donating stock, you want to make sure the donor feels comfortable, knows what they have to complete, because in the end, you want to receive that donation, right? You don't want it to be delayed by days or months or weeks. So taking ownership of that process, making sure they feel comfortable with it, is really key. And then if you as a nonprofit do not know which donor gave stock and who to thank for, there are ways to solve for that, and we'll talk about that. And then the last one being that, when the donor needs to provide the proper information and receipt for tax purposes, the nonprofit not really knowing what to provide or how to even document that and communicate that to the donor. And so that is a gap that we've been coming across too, and helping organizations. And I see a question that came in from Michael: are there ways for donors who wish to remain anonymous to also benefit from a write-off, or is that not possible? Great question. If you don't mind, we'll unpack that down the line, but appreciate that question. All right. So, now we could spend a bit of time here talking about how to receive stock effectively and successfully. And if you have any other, let's say, questions or tips that kind of come to mind, or ideas that come to mind, feel free to contribute them. We'd love to hear what anybody else in this call has done to really maximize this channel. But firstly, more like housekeeping, you want to open up a brokerage account. It's basically the bank account for accepting stock donations. And so make sure you get that set up. Fidelity is actually a great brokerage that a lot of our clients end up opening up an account with. And the reason why is because some brokerages may require you to deposit a really significant amount in order to open up that brokerage account. And so if you don't want to deposit 10,000 or even more than that into a brand new account, Fidelity doesn't have any minimums for that. And so we love working with Fidelity, and we have other preferred brokers that we work with, but you definitely want to have that brokerage account so your donors have a destination, right? They know where that stock is eventually going to be arriving into. And then secondly, you want to determine if you're going to sell the stock upon receipt or hold on to it. Johnny ended up asking about that, and the most common way that nonprofits go about receiving stock is liquidating it and putting that cash right into their operational budget. So if that's the approach that you want to take, that's pretty easy to indicate with whatever brokerage you have an account with. And then thirdly, clearly communicating the benefits for processing stock donations. And one of the tips that we've been really acting upon with a lot of our clients has been tying stocks to a specific impact. And I'm going to show an example here in a bit. But donors love a narrative, right? They love to feel like whatever they're contributing has a direct impact and is going toward a specific solution or problem that's going to be solved. And so if you could be like, hey, one Apple stock equates to this impact, or, one Amazon stock can do this much, and equate it from that perspective, that's been a really engaging way of approaching it for a lot of organizations. And then including messaging around donating stock in typical kind of debit or credit receipts. So when somebody gives to your organization today via debit or credit, whatever that amount is, you typically have some message, thank you message going out to donors. So use that as an opportunity to present the ability to donate stock to donors so that they become more aware about this. And we're going to talk about some other ways to make that awareness more prominent, so that donors can not miss an opportunity, right, to give stock to your organization. And then utilizing technology that enables you to create a frictionless experience for you and your donors. There's, like Overflow, there are tools available for you to go ahead and, make the process smoother, not have to go through the typical traditional talk about that further as well. And then giving donors, especially major donors, an experience that will make them want to give stock again. That's really key. So when you think about your top donors, or maybe even board members, right, you want to be mindful about their experience. And so this is more like an all-encompassing tip that I wanted to provide. But ask yourself, is this something that I would do myself, right? So going back to the previous flow that we ended up talking about, would you do it yourself? And is that an experience that you would pass on to your donors? And so we often encourage nonprofits that we work with to try to make a stock gift themselves so they can see what the process is truly like. Because you're on the other side of the relationship, right? You're not necessarily the one filling out the form. You're not necessarily the one mailing it in, having to work with the broker. It's the donor that does that. So practicing that empathy and putting yourself in the shoes of that donor is really key. Now, with that, I wanted to give some examples of how nonprofits have made stock donations a frictionless experience and a more successful experience for their donors. Firstly, I wanted to show Meals on Wheels of San Francisco. They're one of our clients. And so you can see here that on their website, they ended up offering the ability to give stock, but they added in language that articulated why somebody would give stock, what are the benefits of doing that, and then coupled that with a button to donate stock. So instead of someone having to download a PDF form and go through the process that we ended up describing, they can click a button, and our technology is going to enable a donor to actually pick and choose what shares they want to donate and donate stock directly from their brokerage account in 2 minutes without having to print out any forms, mail in any forms whatsoever. So there's really no manual coordination or even need for a phone call to the broker, et cetera, for donors that are utilizing Overflow to make a stock gift. And so that's one example. You can go ahead and embed a button and make it a click of a button for people to give stock. A different example is that you may want to embed the ability to give stock into your typical debit or credit donation experience. So in the case of Tipping Point, one of our other clients, let's see, Johnny. Yeah, I get distracted by the chat. So love that. Super green with no printing at all. Yeah, that's really what we're getting at, right? Avoid having to print out a bunch of paperwork and have to go through it. But right here we're looking at Tipping Point. What they did is add a link to donate stock, so you can see it right here, right above those different dollar options that somebody might have for making a debit or credit card gift. So now everybody that typically gives via debit or credit is now seeing that donating stock is an option and an avenue for generosity. And so they can click on that, and because they use Overflow, we would handle the rest. We would have our own experience set up and it's a custom branded experience for the donor to give stock in less than 2 minutes. And then a different example from a communication standpoint and how you can actually drive more engagement around this has been, tying that stock or shares to a particular impact. So one of our clients, Sequoia Parks Conservancy, they ended up doing a webinar that we helped them host for their donors. They even had some board members join in that were high net worth individuals and really considering this opportunity to give via stock. And we coached them through that, and we said, hey, what is one share of Tesla going to accomplish at Sequoia Parks Conservancy? And we found that one share of Tesla can literally save 2 sequoias from a fire, and then one share of Amazon can save 12 sequoias from a fire. And so the way people think about stock is definitely different than how they think about debit or credit giving. They're not necessarily thinking about a dollar amount, they're thinking about the amount of shares they have. And so if they have 10 Amazon shares, thinking about giving 1 Amazon share and making it clear what that's going to accomplish has been incredibly helpful in driving that adoption of this giving method. Now, some other ways that we've seen, I don't have exact, visuals here, but talking about it verbally has been, if you have a PDF form and that's the route that you want to take, obviously making that something that someone can easily download on your site, providing whatever contact information is needed for who they need to reach out to. And again, this is, educational, right? So you do have ways to do this outside of Overflow. Of course, you can either go through the manual process, or you can find ways to kind of embed a PDF into or make it something that they can click on and download the PDF immediately with whatever verbiage or language you want to have around donating stock. And so that communication is really key. But what we often find is that it's really important to couple whatever method you have for receiving stock with ongoing communication and engagement, and providing opportunities like a webinar or virtual event, or having some email campaign go out and crafting that effectively. That's really key. And so that's why at Overflow, we not only focus on providing technology, but we also focus on coaching nonprofits on the language, the messaging, even providing custom marketing content and collateral so they can effectively promote this opportunity to their donors. So that is what we have around how to donate stock, common pitfalls that nonprofits and donors face, and what are some of them do it effectively. So with that, I want to open it up for any questions. And Jen, I don't know if you want to jump into with anything you've seen or any comments you want to add, but yeah, we'll open it up to everybody here.
I think this is so enormously helpful. Thank you so much, Jose. It's really, I think it's just so straightforward what you've outlined as far as benefits and easy processes for nonprofits to adapt. So I'm really grateful for what you shared. And we do have a question in the chat from Michael, who asks, could you speak more on the process of enticing donation / inviting a transfer setup of non-cash assets upon death via wills, et cetera? And is your platform only applicable to nonprofits and only for stock?
Yeah, great question. I'll start with the second one. So our platform is applicable to nonprofits at the moment, since the benefit of donating stock, it's specific to registered 501c3s. That's why people can bypass capital gains tax in that charitable event. And we only do publicly traded stocks or ETFs currently, but we are going to be adding cryptocurrencies and other avenues as well. As far as the process for enticing donations and inviting a transfer setup of non-cash assets upon death, that's a conversation that is not done via email. It's not done via text. It's literally done over the phone. And so there is really a way to convey that the sum of those shares and the sum of that amount is really going to leave a powerful legacy through your organization. So when people think about stocks, that's mainly a vehicle for legacy, right? They're thinking about building wealth, but they're not only thinking about wealth creation, they're thinking about wealth transfer. And so you want to tie in your messaging as a nonprofit with that mindset and that desire for legacy and transferring to, whether it be to kids or family members or your organization. And so you really want to kind of button up that messaging that you want to have as an organization around, what is that legacy? What is the amount that could represent? And kind of elevating your expectations a bit, raising the amount, believing and trusting that people have such significant amounts. And if it's not going to be one donor doing that, it could be multiple ones doing that. But if it's, let's say 200,000, 300,000, even more than that you want to make an ask for, make sure that you can communicate that impact that's going to happen, right? With that sum of shares that ultimately would be passed on to you. It could be upon death, or, you mentioned wills, etc. So, legacy is everything when you're talking about, wills and those other avenues for generosity.
That's awesome. If you have additional questions, folks, feel free to throw that in the chat. And in the meantime, I'm curious, Jose, if you could tell us a little bit more about cryptocurrency and any little inklings that of how Overflow is going to be incorporating that into the services for nonprofits.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, crypto has been blowing up as we know, blowing up in good ways. It's blown up in bad ways in the past, but we know that it's a widely adopted trend and asset class that more and more people, especially younger donors, are putting a significant wealth in. And so we found that to be a clear indicator that as wealth is being transferred away from checking and savings accounts into stocks, what is going to be that big bucket for next generation donors? And crypto inevitably, became that, right? It's maturing. So it still has, its uncertainties, and we know that people may have concerns about entering into that, but there's nothing really contradicting the fact that people are really adopting this widely. And so we found that a lot of people that own crypto own it to trade it actively. And because they trade it really actively, and because it can be so volatile, then they're likely absorbing a short-term capital gains tax for that. So the pain point around taxes is definitely higher because, of course, if you hold an appreciated asset for more than a year, then your capital gains tax is going to be lower than it typically would be if it's short-term capital gains tax. So there's a lot of short-term capital gains tax events happening with crypto investors that we felt like this could be a perfect opportunity for us to help, crypto investors bypass that capital gains tax burden, give it to an organization. And they're very savvy digitally. They're really savvy individuals that have already figured out how to create a wallet and figured out how to transfer, crypto from one wallet to an exchange. And so that mindset of donors is really going to be open and receptive to utilizing crypto as a way to invest and do that in a really seamless way, right? I doubt, and we've even come across a lot of scenarios where that type of investor getting into crypto is going to want nothing to do with the PDF form. Right? They're going to want nothing to do with printing something out, nothing to do with getting on the phone with someone. So from a product standpoint, we're really going to be catering to that and mirroring what we're doing from a stock standpoint. So just like somebody can donate stock in less than 2 minutes through Overflow, we're going to let them do the same thing with crypto.
That is brilliant. It's very exciting. And in fact, there was a member of the Be Social Change community who was even using cryptocurrency as a nonprofit in innovative ways in order to create more equity in their programming services. So it's a very cool thing to be incorporating into how nonprofits do their work. And we do have another question from Michael, which is, so what is Overflow's business model in exchange for the service that you are providing? What are the fees that the donor, what are the fees, and is the donor's information gathered and sold, et cetera? How does it work for you?
Yeah, I love it. Michael, you've been asking some amazing questions. So yeah, I mean, our business model is twofold. So, our product, it's not simply transactional. So the way we see it is really a partnership where we want to be your stock donations team or your team for any non-cash donation. And we're going to be helping in many ways, right? So the technology itself and letting somebody donate stock in less than 2 minutes, that's only one piece of everything that we offer. the big bulk of it is going to be coaching you and your team and supporting you and your team with not only the strategies that you need, but also the content, the collateral that you need, whether it be brochures, social media posts, language on your website, etc. Everything that's going to be around it to actually invite and attract those donations, right? And in turn, have people go through that really streamlined process. So because we're literally dedicating people to your team, we have a subscription fee, and that varies. So, Michael, you can reach out to me directly and we can talk about the different packages available for that. But there's a subscription fee associated with it, and our processing fee is very comparable to debit or credit processing fees, where, typically there's so much work happening behind the scenes for processing stock that we felt like, hey, let's lower barriers for nonprofits, keep the pricing comparable to debit or credit, and just focus on innovating and improving our processes behind the scenes at Overflow. So one unique thing about Overflow is that our processing fee is capped, and we're the only company in the market doing that. Typically with debit or credit giving, a solution might take 3% of everything that you end up receiving, right? So if somebody were to give, $200,000 or even more than that, they're going to get a cut of all of it. But in our case, we're only getting a cut on the first 25,000 of any donation that comes in. So if somebody gives, 100,000 or even more than that, our fee is going to be capped.
It's awesome to hear. I love that model too. I think it's really powerful. Can you describe for us, Jose, what is the best way for somebody to, reach out and start getting Overflow incorporated into their organization's fundraising?
Yeah. So we would love to, speak with you directly. So you can reach out to me at jose@overflow.co. And, our team is going to be happy to kind of start a conversation, just understand if there's a fit to begin with. And frankly, not every organization is a fit. And that's totally fine. Some organizations may not really want to delve into this or unpack it, but there are some that really see this as the future of giving. And if we're going to be unlocking more and more generosity, then we've got to tap into these other buckets. So if that's you and you're like, hey, I really see this being the future, and I want to talk about how I can do it successfully, not just the way that it's usually done, that can be pretty complex and complicated for the donor and the nonprofit, we'd be happy to talk. So reach out to me at jose@overflow.com.
That's awesome. Folks, if you have any more questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. And if not, we're going to wrap up in just a minute. But I do have to say just a huge thank you to you, Jose. It has been amazing learning about stock donations. I feel deeply inspired that this is a major form of giving for nonprofits. And I appreciate the ways in which Overflow is helping facilitate that shift. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And if folks have questions, please follow up with jose@overflow.co. And we're going to send follow-up information in an email, so look out for that as well. I appreciate you all, and please do share this information with your friends and the other folks who are working in nonprofits. It is hugely valuable, and we hope to get this movement up and running. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. See ya.